So, good evening and welcome to Real Talk, where every Sunday night we offer insight, education, and resources to in-home caregivers and those affected in their world. This is the children, the parents, and their extended family. Our goal is to offer real-life topics and learning through discussing real issues and offering real solutions. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Wendy, who is someone to watch in the nanny and newborn care specialist world. Wendy worked several years as a nanny, invested deeply in her education, and is one of the recipients of the Newborn Care Solutions coveted Master NCS title, which is a huge accomplishment. It's not easy to complete all the requirements to earn that, so congratulations on that, Wendy.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. Wendy has built a thriving and growing business, offering high quality resumes and consulting to both nannies and newborn care specialists called Nanny Consults. And tonight we're going to kind of dig into one aspect of that business. And Wendy is prepared to share some really amazing information with you that is going to help you rock that interview. So before we get into that, Wendy, I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about your nanny and NCS journey, whether you're still working in that, in addition to Nanny Consults, and kind of how your striving for a really high level of professionalism has impacted your career. Because I think that after hearing about where you started from, what you get there and where you are now, it's going to inspire our audience, and it's going to help them to know that even though you look a whole lot younger than me these days, you have a lot of great wisdom and experience to share. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I got started in this industry when I was very young. I was only 9 years old when I took on my first mother's helper job and worked every day after school. By the time I was 11 years old, I was babysitting on weekends and I was babysitting in the evenings. By the time I was 14 and entered high school, I was already working after school nanny jobs and full-time nanny jobs during the summer. I had my first preemie infant nanny job, full-time, 45 hours a week when I was 16 years old on the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. And I just fell in love with working with children, and I always knew that infants were my passion. So when I went to college to be a NICU nurse. And I thought that was exactly what I wanted to do. But after spending a year in college, I realized that I really wanted something more hands-on working with children, specifically infants, but obviously those positions, I fell into the nanny world, those positions would go long-term. So I worked with infants, toddlers, pre-K was typically my age group, but newborns were always my favorite. A few years ago, Tanya and Newborn Care Solutions came to town and did a live foundational newborn care specialist course. And I decided to sign up for that course. I thought in my head, I'm already a newborn care specialist. I just need that piece of paper that tells me that I am. And what happened is I really just did not understand what a newborn care specialist was until I sat in on that class. And as I was sitting there, I realized this is, 13 years ago, this is what I had wanted to do when I went to school to be a NICU nurse. I wanted that one-on-one with infant care. So I absolutely fell in love with that line of work. I immediately signed up for the advanced course and soon after the elite course, the 2-year program. And I just completely fell in love with the work. I started doing it at the same time that I was nannying. And then right about the time I was finishing up the elite course, because it had such great information, I decided to start a business that had been on my mind for years. I've been the administrator of the Denver Area Nanny Association for close to a decade at this point. And something that I found was really missing in the nanny world was the professional side, the business side of being a nanny, how to communicate with employers professionally, how to interview, how to write a resume, how to write a contract, how to find information you need about legal pay and legal status and your rights as an employee. And so I started Nanny Consults about 1.5 years ago, and it has just grown entirely since then. And I really was able to realize that dream as well. I retired from nannying after a 15-year career in January, and I now am fully self-employed, working as a newborn care specialist and working my consult business during the days.
Fantastic. So I want to kind of just jump right into this because I know you have a ton of valuable information to share tonight. And I know that in particular, these types of topics, this really kind of hands-on practical, here's how you do it. That's what our audience is really interested in doing. So I want to get into our topic. And I alluded a minute ago that we were going to kind of focus on one area of Wendy's specialty. And what we're going to focus on tonight is interviewing. So if you're interested in the tips for online video-based interviewing that are specific around the how-to of doing that, you can hop onto our website and click on the education tab where you can find my presentation that I did here on Real Talk a couple weeks ago that is specific to that. But what we're going to focus on tonight with Wendy is one of the things that she's really, really good at. And that is the specifics of looking and behaving professionally while interviewing, whether that's in person, whether it's digital, whether it's over the phone, kind of all the things that you need to do to really come off as a professional. Because anybody who's taken a class from me will hear, if you want to be paid like a professional, treated like a professional, and get the benefits of a professional, you have to behave, act, and look like a professional. So that's where we're going to target our focus tonight. So when we talk about interviews, Wendy, and people think a lot of times they're going into an interview so that the family can decide if they want to hire them. What do you view as the real purpose of an interview?
Well, first, I just wanted to thank you for what you did with the virtual interviewing, because you did a great job on that one. And I even learned some things on that. That really is a lot of the world we're in right now. But you're right, that interviewing is something I'm very passionate about. And you know, the simple answer to what is the purpose of an interview is it's to get a job. It's connecting you with an employer so that you can have meaningful gain of employment. And that's the simple answer. It's a lot more complicated than that. Anybody who has been in this industry for very long at all knows that finding the right fit is just as important as finding a job. If you end up in a position that's not with a family that's the right fit, it's not going to be a very happy place for you. It probably won't last long. A lot of times it's not in the pay range that you want. And so it's so important to use that interview to really determine if the family that you're interviewing with is going to be the right fit for you, your style of nannying, your boundaries, and your standards. So that's one really important reason for the interview, is to find your right fit. It's also really important to remember that the family is not just interviewing you, you're interviewing the family as well. And that, again, is all part of finding that right fit. Part of what you do in the interview is you ask targeted questions to help you learn that, to help you really get a sense of who the family is and if you would work well together. It's also, and this is one of the most important things, it's the first chance, sometimes the only chance, but really is the most important chance to show them who you are as a business professional. This is a very personal job. It's a very personal industry, but you are still an employee and you are still, this is part of your business. So you need to be able that you're seen as be able to be seen as a professional, and you need to be able to show them that you should be respected as a professional. So in that interview, the purpose is really to set the tone from the start that you are to be respected as a professional, and to set a standard for any of your future business communications. That can be the initial contract negotiations, that can be your rate negotiations, your yearly reviews when you ask for a raise or when you ask for a baby raise, handling conflicts that might arise. That interview that you start in is the place that you set the standard for how your business side communications are going to go throughout the job. And it's really all about respect. Without a mutual respect between your employers and you, or your clients and you, if you're an NCS, it's not going to be a healthy business relationship.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I'm a big believer in that you set the tone for the entire relationship the very first time that you meet. So I love that you said that. Before I kind of jump into our next point, I do have one question around that. Could you give us an idea of, hey, here's one or two things that could say, this is a good fit, or maybe this should be a little bit of a red flag that says maybe this isn't a good fit?
Sure. One would be kind of around rate discussions. That's often a big red flag. If you have, especially if you've already had a phone interview, lasting 10 or 15 minutes, and they talk about having one rate set, and then when you come into the interview and you get towards the end of the interview and you're talking about your rates or your contract or the benefits that you expect, if they start kind of backpedaling or say, oh, well, we're not sure about paying legally, none of our friends do. When they start those backpedaling issues, then it is a big red flag that they may not be the right fit for you. And another one would be, if you are somebody who really likes to come in, you have a huge knowledge base, and that's one of your specialties. You are hired as the nanny or the NCS who knows everything. If you go into that interview and the family starts talking over you or correcting you, that's probably not going to be your perfect fit. And on the same side of that, if you are a fairly new nanny and you find that they're asking you some very difficult questions that you have never experienced before, around, a child's age you haven't experienced before or a special need, and you're not able to answer those questions and they're really kind of hounding on asking those questions, that probably means that they need somebody with a different set of skills than you have to provide.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And one of the things that I think is really important around that is it's okay to not be the right fit for every single family. Too many people think they have to go in and impress everybody and get offered every single job that comes along. Do you agree with that, Wendy, that not every family is the right fit and that's okay?
Yes, absolutely. And I told you I was the administrator of the Denver Area Nanny Association, and I'm also in a lot of the international nanny groups and the US nanny groups. And each one of us is so different and provides such a different style. And we're not the right fit for every family, and every family is not the right fit for us. And that's 100% okay. It's kind of like dating. You can't marry every single person you run into on the street. There's a couple that you might click well with. So you really just want to find that right match between you and the family.
Yeah, I would agree on that. Now, there's a couple guys that I dated in the past that it would have been okay to marry, but boy, there's a couple that wouldn't have been so great. So I totally agree. So let's talk for a few minutes around dressing for an interview and why it's so important. And I talked about that when I talked about the virtual one, about making sure that whatever's seen matters, but how should somebody dress for an interview? What does it say about them? Why is it important?
Yes, this is one of my favorite questions because it comes up so often in all of the nanny groups. And I actually get a lot of kickback. You'll see me respond to a lot of those. I get a lot of kickback from a lot of nannies in what I advise on this. So I'm just going to start by saying everybody has their choice of what to wear for an interview, but I do want to talk a little bit about why it's so important to pay attention to how you dress. Now, my recommendation for all interviews is always to dress to impress. And something that's common in the business world that I think really does relay well into the nanny world, into the NCS world, is that you should always dress one level above the people that you are interviewing with. Now, typically in the nanny industry, if you go into an interview, a lot of times they're going to be in jeans or yoga pants for the interview. And if you're in an NCS interview, sometimes they might be a little bit better dressed because they're coming from work. A lot of it depends on if you're going on a Friday or Saturday, or a Saturday or Sunday, or if you are having an evening interview or a daytime interview. But in general, most of the time you should dress business casual. So that's going to be just a level above just casual clothing. You're going to dress business casual. So I'm dressed in business casual right now, at least from the waist up, because I'm on video. But I typically will wear black pants and a button-up shirt, or I'll wear a dress. You should always dress very modestly too. So if you're female, or you should not wear something that shows your cleavage. You shouldn't wear short skirts. Your skirt should be just above knee length or longer. Typically, you should wear tights or something underneath the dress, but that's not always necessary if it's a summer job. But business casual in most cases is going to be the appropriate attire for an interview. Now, if you're interviewing with a high profile client, a high net worth client, or someone you know is a very high-end business professional, I don't know about you, but I always do a little bit of research on who I'm interviewing first. Those are the cases where it might actually be important to dress business professional. Now, when I made the transition from the nanny career into the NCS career, I dress business professional a lot more often in my NCS positions than I do in my nanny positions, because I tend to interview with a different caliber of clientele. And the other things I typically recommend, and I'm going to explain all of these in just a minute, is to cover any visible tattoos that you have, to remove any piercings other than ear piercings, to wear, if you are female or you identify as female, to wear light makeup, nothing heavy, but also not too little. Typically, it's good to wear just a little bit, similar to what I'm wearing today or what you are wearing today. And to wear easy to remove shoes. So there's a couple reasons behind each of these. For tattoos and piercings, the reason that you want to do that is because there are a lot of families who will make a snap judgment when they see that you come in with and you're heavily tattooed or heavily pierced. It can also happen if you have, a really funky color of hair. Now, all of these things, there's absolutely nothing wrong. I have tattoos. I've had funky colored hair before. But what happens is, because you don't know if it's their religion or the way that they grew up, or just something from being in the business world that they've got in the back of their mind, they may not even consciously think it, but they may judge you to start with because you've got those tattoos and piercings. So what covering up does is it allows you to get past that snap judgment moment. And that's something you can bring up in the interview. It's something that you can discuss and have a talking point. Hey, I've got a lot of tattoos. Does your family have any problem with tattoos? I typically have a nose piercing. Does your family have any problem with that? 99% of the time, they don't actually have a problem with tattoos or piercings or funny colored hair or anything. They just had that snap judgment. And what happens is, if you don't cover up before you get in there, you lose out on that moment to have that first impression that you are seen as a business professional, especially if they are interviewing multiple nannies and somebody else comes in and they don't have any of that. So it's not necessarily that they disagree with the fact that you have those things, it's that you're avoiding that snap judgment they may make. Now, one of the things that I get a lot in the nanny industry is, well, I wear jeans or leggings because I might have to get down on the floor with the kids. And this is what I say to that. Number one, my black pants are washable. I got them at Dress Barn for $48. I can wash them and I can get down and move around absolutely fine with those. If I wear a dress, that's one of the reasons I usually will wear tights underneath, because if I get down on the floor, plus I've got the knee-length dress, I can pull it down to my knees and I'm not showing anything off. You can remain modest and still get down on the floor with the kids. The caveat to that is, though, that you need to remember, again, this is a professional setting. So even if you are interacting with the kids, make sure that you're not spending too much time doing so. Really, the purpose of the interview is to focus on the parents. That doesn't mean ignore the children, but it does mean that they should not be your only focus during the interview. And then the reason that I say wear comfortable shoes is that when you walk into their house, many houses now are shoe-free households. So make sure you've got comfortable shoes on that are easy to slip off, and good socks. But back to the jeans and the leggings issue. Again, it's about that snap judgment. When you walk in and they're comparing you to everybody else that they've interviewed, if they see you in jeans and leggings, they're not going to see you on the same level of professionalism. And what I want to make sure everybody remembers is that that level of professionalism, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, that's your bargaining chip. That's how much professional respect you have there dictates so many things. It dictates the benefits you can ask for in your contract. It dictates the rate. A family who doesn't see you as a business professional is going to be a lot more likely to try to negotiate you down to the lowest price you can possibly have.
So Wendy, I do want to ask you one question around that. You mentioned a lot of different things in there, some really interesting things for people to think about and really kind of make the decision. And I love that you said at the beginning, look, at the end of the day, you can wear what you want to. It's your interview, it's your decision. And you're sharing tips that might make a difference in the resume. The one thing that didn't get mentioned that I tell people, but I wonder if you would view this in the same way, is to avoid heavy perfume of any kind, because there are so many people these days that are sensitive to perfume or are concerned about toxins and things. Do you see that as really an issue in the nanny world? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't interviewed in person for a nanny or an NCS job in, a good 15 years at this point.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something really important to remember. It's actually more prevalent now than it was, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It wasn't such an issue then, but so many people now have more allergies, have more sensitivities, or are just starting to recognize that that's why they have some issues. So always make sure you're not wearing perfumes, you're not wearing perfumed lotions or heavily perfumed soaps. Even some essential oils can bother people. So really make sure that you're not wearing those heavy scents. This is especially important if you're working with, interviewing with a pregnant or nursing mother. Their sense of smell is so much more intense that they can really struggle with that. I actually had one position that said, we loved the person who came in before you, but there's no way we could have had her in our home with how heavy her perfume was. So that's very important. And something else I want to make sure to mention is if you are a smoker, don't smoke before your interview. Make sure that you smoke long before your interview, then shower, then do your hair, then go to work. If you are not a smoker, you can smell that somebody's been smoking, even if it's been 20 or 30 minutes since they've done so. And the cover-up sprays really don't cover it up at all. So make sure that you're not smoking.
Yep, I would agree on that, because I'm very sensitive to cigarette smoke. And that would be, if it were me and I was interviewing, I'd be done. The interview would be over. I wouldn't even continue the interview with someone. I would say, you may be fantastic, but I can't have you in my home.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one thing I do want to add just to kind of this whole question, going back to what you wear, what you cover, what you don't cover. You're absolutely right that absolutely you can wear what you want. You can present yourself how you want. One of the common things I hear is, well, if they don't want to work with me the way that I am, I don't want that job anyway. And what I want to tell you to that is it's absolutely okay to feel that way. Again, we talked a little bit about those snap judgments are not always how they feel. But what happens when you walk into a home and you're dressed professionally and you are dressed modestly? You're giving off an impression that you are someone that just about anyone would want to work with. So by not putting that part of you forward, you're actually decreasing your job pool. And we talked about you're only going to be with families who are the right fit. So that may be okay, but it gives you the chance to not be left out of their consideration and widens your job pool if you go into it with that professional attitude.
So that certainly gives people lots of things to think about as they make their own decisions around what that is and what it's not. And yeah, you're dressed business casual today. I'm not. I'm just casual. And that's okay.
You look great.
So how should you prepare prior to an interview? What are the things that people need to think about before an interview?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it's going to be similar to what you talked about on the virtual side. A lot of the preparation is the same. You know, making sure you review the information that you have on the family, whether that's from an agency, from care.com messages, or from a 10-minute phone call. I do recommend if you do a phone interview before you do the full interview that you really try to keep it short because you want to have most of those conversations in person, not over the phone, or over video call is fine as well. But for phone interviews, I really suggest you keep it real short and simple. When you're going to an interview in person, make sure you know your location. Check it and double check it and triple check it. Make sure you know where you're going. And if you're not driving, make sure you're checking bus schedules. Make sure you really understand how long it's going to take you to get there, or train schedules. For any virtual interviews, go back and watch Tanya's step. I don't need to repeat all of that. But when you are going in person, make sure you arrive early. I typically arrive around 15 minutes early to the interview. That gives me as much time as I need in case there's an accident, in case I have car trouble, in case I forget I was supposed to get gas. It gives me that buffer zone. Now, when I get there 15 minutes early, I do not walk in 15 minutes early. I wait in my car until about 5 minutes before. Just so I'm not surprising them in their underwear, you know, just like going in too early to a nanny job. So plan to arrive early enough to account for anything that might delay you, but don't walk in until it's about 5 minutes early. I have do not smoke on here again. Even if you're nervous, don't smoke in the car before you go into the interview and then spray Febreze all over yourself. It won't work well. Make sure you have copies available of your resume and any letters of reference you want to bring along. A lot of times you've already sent this to them, but it's very nice to have it in hand to bring it to them in case they haven't printed it out. If you've got a portfolio, go ahead and flip through that, make sure everything's put together and have that ready to go. If you are an NCS especially, but for some nannies as well, bring a sample contract that you can look through with the family in case they have questions about what's included in your contract. And have a list of questions prepared. Now this is something, I actually have a list of questions that I send to nannies. So feel free to reach out to me, anyone who sees this, and I can send you a list of questions, or I might post a link to it on Real Talk below so that people can access that. But bring a list of questions that you know that you want to discuss with the family. I have a pretty extensive list of questions. I don't always ask every question, and that's okay. I read the room and decide which ones are most important for me to know in this interview. Bring a notebook and a pen. It's shown that when your hands are visible, people trust you a lot more. So even if you're not planning to take notes, having that notebook and pen in front of you keeps your hands visible at all times. So make sure you've got your notebook and your pen with you. And then the other thing I really suggest doing before you head into an interview is preparing your answers both to commonly asked questions and more difficult questions. Now, to prepare your answers for commonly asked questions, it's really simple. Just go on Google and look up what to ask my nanny during the interview. You'll have 5 or 6 links right there that'll tell you exactly what those parents are finding when they look up what should we ask our nanny during the interview. But it's also important to prepare some answers to some of the tougher questions so that you're not caught off guard when you're in the interview. Questions like, have you been in a car accident if you totaled your car last year? Or questions like, are you willing to submit to a drug test? You know, I live in a state where it's legal to smoke marijuana. So many people do that on their off time and it does not affect their job whatsoever. However, if they ask, are you willing to submit to a drug test? It's much better to have an answer prepared of, I use this recreationally, but I'm willing not to, or I'm not willing not to. It's better to have those answers prepared so that you're not stuck agreeing to a drug test and then having to explain why it came up positive for a substance. Questions like, have you ever been let go from a position? Or what was the worst position you've ever been in as a nanny? Or what is your greatest weakness? And a lot of those questions, by preparing ahead of time, you can put a positive spin on them so that you don't come off negative when you're answering those questions on the fly.
Yeah, those are some great tips there. And I can certainly vouch for the location thing. Many people know, but we moved a few months ago, and the neighborhood we moved into was a relatively new neighborhood. UPS couldn't find us, FedEx couldn't find us, Amazon was delivering to a wrong neighborhood 10 miles from here. And when I signed my kids up for school, they didn't get added to the school bus schedule. Now school started virtually, but nevertheless, they didn't get added to the school bus schedule because their Google Maps said that my address did not exist. And so now we have to tell people, do not trust Google Maps. Follow our written directions to get to our house. And we find that some people, depending on which app they use, some can find us, but most of them can't even find our house. It looks like we don't even exist. So I totally get it. And that could really throw somebody off. Say they were coming here to interview and they're 10 miles down the road and now they're late and then they stress out, right? So
And my house is the same way. Everybody's GPS takes them across the street. I do want
Exactly.
to say one thing, because that brought it to mind on the virtual interview. I think I had put it in the comments on the interview, but if you are doing a virtual interview, especially if it's with somebody who's not in your home state, make sure you check, double check, and triple check the time zone difference. I was actually in Arizona and flew home to have a interview with somebody in Hawaii. Well, my watch did not update with my phone when I landed in Denver, so it was still stuck on a different time. And not only that, I did the math backwards on the difference between a Hawaii time zone and the Colorado time zone. So I arrived at the interview about 5 hours early and then sent them a message and said, hey, are we meeting? It's time.
Mhm.
And luckily they came in, they were available, and we all laughed about it later because halfway through the interview, I realized this is completely the wrong time.
Mhm.
But that's something important to do for virtual interviews as well.
I know, us difficult Arizonans with our, we refuse to participate in daylight savings time, so it screws everybody up.
Yeah.
For sure. And speaking of those kind of things, okay, so that I started to address it. You addressed it even more in a roundabout way, both of us did. Nervousness in the interview. How do you battle nervousness prior to that interview?
Yes, absolutely. And this is something we all deal with. Even those of us who interview time and time again, we all get nervous before interviews. And this includes before this interview. I was nervous before this interview. So the tricks I'm going to tell you right now are exactly what I did to prepare for Real Talk tonight. The first thing I do is I look at affirmations. Remind yourself why you are a great nanny, why you are a great newborn care specialist. Take a minute to read back over your letters of reference. Go back and look at that email that somebody sent thanking you for being amazing, or the birthday card that you got from your 4-year-old girl you watched for 5 years. Take a minute and look through all of those. Affirm yourself. Remind yourself why you are a great fit for this position, because if you believe it, it's going to be a lot easier to convince them that you are the right fit for that position. Now, one of my favorite things to do, and I don't have time to show it to you guys tonight, but go on YouTube and Google Grey's Anatomy superhero pose. I don't know if you guys know what the superhero pose, it's when you stand with your feet hip width apart and your hands on your hips and you put your head up as high as you can with perfect posture, and you stand like Superman does. And it is scientifically proven that if you do this for 2 minutes prior to an interview or anything else stressful, business related, that not only will you go into that arena with more confidence, you'll actually perform better. I do my Superman pose before any time I go to an interview. I do something like Real Talk. I spoke at one of the International Nanny Training Days. I actually did the Superman pose with everybody in that room. And that Superman pose, you'd be amazed how much it can change your attitude and how much confidence it can give you. Also, once you are actually within the interview, just make sure you're presenting yourself with confidence, even if you're not really feeling it at the moment. That means hold your head high, have good posture, especially when you're sitting in the house with them. Still hold your posture. Don't slump down on the couch as you're talking with them. When you're having that good posture, it gives you confidence. You speak more professionally, you speak more slowly, and you speak more clearly. Another thing to do if you're really nervous, take a deep breath before you answer questions. Really think about your answer. If you are someone like me who, when you're nervous, speaks very, very quickly and talks way too fast and nothing actually comes across, slow yourself down. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually match the pace of the people you're speaking with. If you listen to them and then try to match the pace that they are speaking, it really takes a minute to calm yourself down. But never hesitate to take a breath, to pause before you answer a question. And while you're taking that pause, just remind yourself in your head, I am strong, I am confident, I am the right fit for this position.
Fantastic. Those are all things that I would have said also. So that's great. So I kind of have one kind of big final question for you in terms of this. And this is actually something that I talked about just a few days ago when I was doing a training, is Who should lead the interview? Should this be the potential employer? They take the lead, they run the show, and you just follow along and do what you're told? Should a newborn care specialist or nanny lead the interview, or is it a give and take? What is your viewpoint on that, Wendy?
That's a really, really good question, and another one that I really love talking about, so thank you for that. You know, it's really important when you are in that interview that you do, as the nanny or as the NCS, that you lead the interview. But you need to do so kind of discreetly. And there's a couple ways to accomplish that. But the reason that you need to do that discreetly is because you don't want to remove your client or your employer's feeling of control. Because they are the employer and they're going to have the upper hand in that relationship, they do need to feel like they have the control. If you come on too strong and you take over, it can make them anxious and it can cause concern over whether you will actually be able to work with them and within their preferences within their household. So you don't want to come across as stealing the control from them and running the show. So how do you lead the interview without actually leading the interview is kind of the real question. And it starts with a few small things to start your interview off right, and that really show respect for your employers or your potential employers, a respect for them, respect for their health and the health of their children, respect for their home. And that is, when you walk in the door, start out with a firm handshake. Now, during COVID, that might be an elbow bump or a fist bump or just a wave. You may not do a handshake, but typically you want to start out with a firm handshake and you want to thank them for taking the time to meet you with today. That thank you at the beginning is very, very important. We talked about it already. Ask if you'd like to, ask if they would like you to remove your shoes. Ask if you can wash your hands. That's something especially important if you're working in a home with an infant or a newborn. And then ask them where they would like me to sit if they don't offer or tell me immediately. All of these 4 things, they seem so small, but what they do is they leave your potential employer in control of the beginning of the interview. They feel the respect from you, they feel the thanks for their time, and they feel that you're there, that you are respecting their home and their health. And those are all great things just to start that tone off right. Now, one of my favorite things to talk about when I talk about how to lead the interview without leading the interview, by making sure that your potential employer still has that feeling of control, I call it accept the water. Almost always when you go into an interview, not every time, but almost always, as you sit down or as you're coming in, they'll say, "Can I get you a glass of water?" Most of the time, we are conditioned to say, "Oh, no, that's fine. Don't worry about it. I don't need anything." What happens when you accept the water is you are putting another extra level of comfort with your potential employer. They are inviting you into their home, which is a little bit of a scary thing, to take care of their most precious possessions, and they need that feeling of control. One of the best ways to have that feeling of control is to feel like they are hosting you. So when you accept that water, whether you drink it or not, they've just done something to serve you, which gives them a feeling of control. And so it's so important, whether you're going to drink the water or not drink the water, to always accept the water. Now, if they're offering you a glass of wine, most of the time I wouldn't accept that. Or I would say, "Thank you so much for the offer, but can I just have a glass of water instead?" All of those are still going to do the same thing, but accepting that glass of water makes all the difference in the world of setting the tone for that interview. It decreases tension. It gives you something to do if you need that moment to take a breath and collect your thoughts. Always accept the water. Ask if you could take notes once you sit down. That, again, we talked about it earlier, gives you something to do with your hands. Have your list of questions if you brought one in front of you, but don't start off going down your list of questions. At that moment, let them lead the interview. Let them go over their questions. Hold all of your questions until they ask, "Do you have any questions for us?" As I go through an interview, as they're asking questions, I have mine in front of me and I put little check marks or take little notes next to the questions we've already covered. And sometimes, depending on what their responses are or how the conversation is going, I'll make little stars next to a question I know that I want to ask. But I always let them ask all of their questions that they want to ask first. And then once they ask, then I lead the remainder of the interview. So all of my questions still get asked, but I'm not taking over from them. If a question that I ask leads to them asking more questions, I give that control back to them and I let them continue that interview. By doing this, I still make sure that everything that I need to talk about at interview is being talked about, but I'm not taking away from their feeling of control that they are leading the interview. And another thing that's just really important to remember is that when you are just talking with them, don't ever interrupt them. Even if they interrupt you, and it happens a lot, you get into a really good conversation and we start interrupting each other. And it's important that you not interrupt them, even if they interrupt you.
So there has been a ton of really good information. We are almost out of time, but I want to ask really quickly, is there any one final tip, or if you could say, look, if you take nothing else out of this tonight, remember this, what would your one takeaway be?
You know, what I'd love to share is something just a little bit different because I didn't get to it. Instead of doing one takeaway, I want to share that it's really easy. You know, this is our line of work. This is our income. This is our groceries each month, our gas in our car. And it's really easy to make decisions in an interview out of fear. You may notice those red flags. You may notice that this is not the right family for you. But if it is your only option, there's a sense of desperation that happens. And sometimes that forces you to go into a position that you're not quite ready for. And what I want to caution a lot of people, sometimes it really is the only choice. And sometimes you have to do what you need to do to get by. But a lot of times that desperation is, we're not quite as desperate as we may feel. And a lot of times, if you wait that extra 2, 3, 4 weeks to find the right fit family, not only will you be happier, you'll be healthier emotionally, you'll be healthier physically, and a lot of times you're going to make more money and you're going to make up for that extra 3 weeks it took in no time at all. So remember when you're doing the interview that you don't always have to take the first job that you're offered. And let me tell you, if you become really experienced and proficient in interviewing skills, you'll get a lot of job offers. You'll also have to learn how to turn down job offers, which is a whole nother ball game. But remember that it's not always the end of the world if a family is not the right fit for you.
Absolutely. So I really appreciate all the information that you've shared, and I'm so appreciative of you joining us tonight, Wendy. It is always a pleasure to chat with you, and it's been an honor to learn with you tonight. You really have given our audience some things to chew on, some things to look at, some things to improve on, and a few things to give themselves a high five and say, yeah, I do that. I must be doing a pretty good job. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. So if you have any questions for Wendy about this topic or anything else related to working with her, put them in the feed and tag Nanny Consults or tag Newborn Care Solutions, and we'll make sure that Wendy gets those and hops on and answers them. And if you're wanting to rewatch this segment or catch any of our past Real Talk episodes, along with accessing our other content, hop on over to newborncaresolutions.com and click on the education tab, and you can find all of our Real Talk on there, as well as all of our other offerings. So thank you for joining us, and have a great night.